When we talk about terminal file managers, a couple of options always come to mind, things like NNN and VIFM. But another really popular solution is Ranger. Now, Ranger is my personal favorite style of terminal file manager, even though I don't run Ranger itself. So because Ranger is written in Python and it's a popular application, there's obviously going to be a bunch of re-implementations of it. Now, LF is written in Go, and that is my personal favorite terminal file manager, but that isn't the topic for today. Today, we're looking at another application by the name of, I guess you'd say it is Joshuto, and this one is Ranger, but written in Rust. Now, do keep in mind, this is still very much in development, but I'm very interested to see where another implementation of a Ranger-style file manager actually does go, especially one that actually acknowledges the limitations that exist inside of LF. So if you've used an application like this before, you probably understand the basic usage of it. So we can move around by using the J and the K keys to go up and down. We can go into a folder by pressing L. We can go out of it by pressing H. And if we press L on a file, it's going to try and open it up. The file opening does work a bit differently here, but I'll get into that in just a bit. You can also go and highlight something by pressing the space key on it, and that will go and highlight it in yellow by default. That color can be changed, and probably should be, because there's a couple of things like, say we have these JPEGs here. If you go and highlight those, it's not entirely clear that they actually are highlighted. It does change the font to being bold, but that's not really that clear. One thing that I haven't seen before, but it very well might be there in other ones, is if we go and press the left and the right square bracket, that's going to go and move the cursor on the left-hand side rather than the cursor on the one we're actually selected on. So we don't actually have to go back to the parent directory to move around like that. I don't know if others do this, but it is a really cool feature. Now, as always with these applications, if you have something that requires a multi-key combo, so let's say we want to go and highlight this, this, and this, and we want to do a copy. So in this case, copy is YY rather than just Y. It's actually going to go and show us what we can run alongside that key to go and do that action. So let's say you wanted to do something like a sort, for example. So pressing S is the start of sort, and then we can do things like sort by lexical by pressing L, by M time, by natural, and by reverse by pressing the following keys that it shows right here. So let's go and do a sort by reverse, and that changes the sort like that. Now, I know some people like icons and some don't. In my case, though, I really do like having them here because it makes it very easy to see exactly what these file types are at a glance. If I don't care if it's exactly a PNG or a JPEG, I just care that it's an image. By just seeing that there's an image icon there, I know straight away exactly what it is. While colors do achieve basically the same purpose if you don't have that many file types, one problem they do have is, let's say you have some C files and Java files and Python files and JavaScript and C++. All of these are going to show up probably as the exact same color. While you could go and look at the extension, I don't feel like doing that. Just show me exactly what the file type is, and I can just go from there. One thing that does bother me about the interface is these lines right here. So these do connect, but not the ones in the middle. Let's go over to LF, and as you'll see, all of the lines in here connect perfectly fine. I'm guessing this is a bug and not a design choice. If it's a design choice, it's a bad design choice, and you should just go and fix it. Now, we also do have a search, and this works basically the same way you'd expect them to, so we can search for something like, I don't know, games, and if we had multiple things there, let's go and search for ME instead. We can go and press N to go and cycle through those, and capital N to go in the other direction, but you can't actually do a reverse search. Because we do have the N and the capital N, it still lets you do a reverse search, but having the question mark there would be nice as well. Now, this is more of a personal preference thing, but if we go and scroll, we go right down to the bottom, it scrolls by pages rather than scrolling one by one. So if we go over to something like LF instead and do the exact same thing here, if I go and scroll down, it scrolls down as you're actually scrolling. I would like that to be an option in the config file. I don't think there's any reason to go and get rid of this version if people like it, but having the option there would be nice. We can also set the permissions on a file, but it doesn't actually error check properly when we try to do so. So if we want to do that, all we do is press equals on the file we want to modify. And let's say we go and just stick a bunch of W's on the end. Now, what I would expect it to do is just be like, hey, don't do that. That's a bad idea. In this case, though, the application is just going to crash. Very simple fix. I don't know why it doesn't do that. Now, like you'd expect with like LF and Ranger, all of the hotkeys are actually commands in the application. So if you actually want to go and run any of those commands separately, you can go and press the colon key and it will bring up a prompt for you. Now, this doesn't actually have any tab completion, so you do have to know exactly what you want to run, but there is still somewhat of a command mode here. Now, unlike LF, this does actually have a tab system. I personally don't really care for tabs, but it is cool to see. So pressing Control T is going to make you a new tab, and then to cycle through the tabs, we press Tab or Shift Tab to go in the other direction. So let's go in this one and go into like, I don't know, this directory right here, tab to the next one. As we can see, this one is still in the home directory. Let's go into the Android folder here, and then tab to the next one. That is back to home. This one's still in models, and this one's still in Android. And as you can probably expect, you can use these tabs to go and copy files around. So let's go and copy this one here, and go back to the Android folder. If we then go and paste that by pressing P and then P, as we can see, that file is there, and it's also still here as well. Basic stuff you can do with tabs inside of a file manager. And then once you're done with the tab, pressing Q is going to close it, and when you only have one tab available, it will then go and close the application. Now, speaking of very basic features, if we go back in here, we can also go and rename a file as well. There's a couple of ways we can do that. So the first way is by pressing C and then W. That is going to just be a generic rename. Let's just call this garbledtext.png, and worked perfectly fine. But we can also go and append and prepend text as well. I've never seen this functionality actually built into a file manager like this, but pressing A is going to do an append. So just before the extension, we can go and add some stuff there, and that changes the name like that. And capital A is going to do a prepend, so we can go and stick stuff at the front. Obviously, you could go and rewrite the entire name and just use the rename command, but some situations do call for a different method. Now, there is one more way to do a rename, and that is a bulk rename. So let's go and select a couple of files in here. We'll select these four here, and then if we go and press B and then B again, in my case, it's going to open it up inside of Vim. The way it selects this editor is based on your editor environment variables, so if you have it set as nano, it's going to use that instead. So let's go and add some stuff to the front of these. Let's go and, I don't know, add some gibberish here. And if we go and save this, as we can see, it's going to then prompt us to actually change all of these names just to make sure that we're 100% sure. And let's go and say yes. And as we can see, all of those files have changed. Now, all of the basic stuff you'd expect from an application like this is basically here. The only thing that we don't have is file previews. Regardless of what the file type is, whether it's an image or text, currently file previews do not exist. Now, let's talk a bit about the way you actually configure the application. So the first thing I'd recommend is going and downloading the config files from the GitHub, because there's a couple of things that are just missing from the config that's downloaded with the application that is inside of that one. I have no idea why, but that's just the way it is. So once you've downloaded all of those, you're going to make a folder in your .config folder called Joshuto, and you're going to put all four of those files in there. So those four files are the joshuto.toml, the keymap.toml, the mimetype.toml, and the theme.toml. Now, I'm personally not a big fan of the toml format because it has a bunch of junk in here that just really doesn't add anything to the file. So I would suggest moving away from this format, but if this is the format the dev wants to go with, that's the dev's problem to deal with. So adding in key maps is very, very simple. My suggestion is just, instead of writing it, just go and copy one of these existing sections and go and paste it in here so you don't actually forget anything. So inside of these map command sections, we have two different subcommands. We have the command and we have the keys. So command tells the system what command to actually run, and then keys are the keys you need to press to actually activate that command. We can have as many repeats of the same command as we want, so we could have like 50 different versions of new tab if we really, really wanted to. Now, we'll leave the command as is, but let's go and change the keys that we use to actually run the command. So this is actually a comma-separated list, and everything in here does need to be surrounded inside of quotes. So let's go and have it so when we press, I don't know, A, and then S, and then, I don't know, T, for example, it's going to go and run the new tab command. So let's go back over to Joshuto. That one there. They look exactly the same. Relaunch the application. And if we go and press A, and then S, and as we can see, now it's actually prompting us to press T to actually make a new tab. Now, one other reason for downloading the config files is that the documentation on the commands is really, really bad. So this shows you what all the commands you can use actually are. If you go to the GitHub, what it's going to link you to is the file inside of the source code that actually defines all of the commands, which isn't exactly the best documentation. It's better than nothing, but this is still not really documentation. And that's basically all you get in the way of documentation. Now, one thing this doesn't support, which does kind of bother me a bit, is it doesn't let you run external commands. So doing things like, say, CDing and deleting files and renaming files does have an implementation in the application, but if you want to go and run something like ls, or you want to run a git command, for example, that isn't supported. So having the ability to run external applications like lf does, I think would be really, really useful. Now, moving over to the MIME type file, this file basically lets you decide how to actually open up the files you select. What I've noticed is it doesn't actually do anything. So if we go back to Joshuto, and if we go and say open up some random file in here, let's say, I don't know, this test file here, what that's supposed to do in there is go and open it up with my editor. In this case, it always thinks that I'm running the open with command though. Whereas open with is only supposed to be run if I press R on a file. Basically, open with lets you select what application to use when you actually go and open the file. So in this case, let's open it with Vim. It's a blank file. It worked perfectly fine. I don't know why that's not working. I haven't been able to find anything on it. Now, the Joshuto RC file should be pretty straightforward if you've ever used an RC file before. Basically, it just lets you define the general configuration of the application. Once again, this doesn't actually have any documentation, so you sort of have to guess what these things actually do. Luckily, most of them are fairly well named though. And then along the same lines, another file that's pretty straightforward is the theme.toml. Now, it is a toml file, which does mean you have to have these annoying headers everywhere, but besides that, it's pretty easy to work around, except it doesn't have much documentation, if any documentation at all. So take what exists there in the default config and modify it as you need it to be modified. So the way it breaks it down is by file type, where you can go and say set directories to light blue, links to green, sockets to light magenta, and then for anything where you want to go and base the color on the extension, have it in the ext section, and then have ext.bmp for the BMP colors, or ext.jpeg for the JPEG color, or ext.avi, so on and so forth, for setting the colors based on that. Now, I believe the color names in here are ANSI color names, so the 16 colors that exist inside of your terminal. So you have things like green or light green, yellow or light yellow, red or light red, so you can't go and just write in things like sky blue and then expect that to work. Now, while the entire application is a work in progress, there are a couple of things that are specifically being worked on. So right now, built-in command line support, which is where we went and press the colon key and we could run commands from there. The file previews, those are a work in progress. As you might have saw in the config file for Joshuto RC, there were some options in there. They just don't exactly do much right now. And also tab autocomplete, obviously for things like the command mode. Obviously, I do not recommend running the application in the state that it's currently in, unless you just want, you know, a Ranger-like file manager that just doesn't have many features. In that case, it's probably perfectly fine. I would still suggest going and running something like LF and then stripping out most of the functionality from it, but if you want something written in Rust instead, this might be worth checking out, and I will be checking this out in the future again, once it's had some more development and it actually becomes a good implementation of a Ranger-style file manager. So I think that's going to be pretty much everything for me, but before I go, I would like to thank my supporters. So a special thank you to Joachim, Donald, Michael, Andre, Nathan, David, Will, Brennan, Chica Bento, Jamie, Joseph, Josh, Mitchell, Peter D, Stephen Theroux, Tony Tushar, and all of my $2 supporters. If you'd like to go support work, the links down below to all of the things. That is tech over tea, available basically anywhere, and then this channel is available on Odyssey, if you like to watch on a platform that isn't YouTube. So I think that's pretty much everything for me, and